Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to IMI Health Hour. The importance of social media in modern life needs no overemphasis. I received a wonderful WhatsApp message only yesterday about the quote from Imam Ali on the subject of knowledge. Before we discuss the topic today, which is research ethics, I'd like to read these golden nuggets. Absolutely wonderful. So what it says is that Hazrat Ali was replied to a group of 10 learned men who said, they asked a question, we seek your permission for putting a question to you. So Imam Ali said that you are at liberty. They said, of knowledge and wealth, which is better and why? Please give a separate answer to each of these items. Hazrat Ali answered in 10 parts. And these are wonderful points that I'd like to read out. Number one, knowledge, he said, is the legacy of the prophets. Wealth is the inheritance of the pharaohs. Therefore, knowledge is better than wealth. Number two, you are to guard your wealth and knowledge guards you. Therefore, knowledge is better. Number three, a man of wealth has many enemies, while a man of knowledge has many friends. Hence, knowledge is better. Number four, knowledge is better because it increases with distribution, while wealth decreases by that act. Number five, knowledge is better because a learned man is apt to be generous, while a wealthy person is apt to be miserly. Number six, knowledge is better because it cannot be stolen, while wealth can be stolen. Number seven, knowledge is better because time cannot harm knowledge, but wealth rusts in due course of time and wears away. Number eight, knowledge is better because it is boundless, while wealth is limited. You can keep account of it. Number nine, knowledge is better because it eliminates the mind, while wealth is apt to blacken it. Number 10, knowledge is better because knowledge induced humanity in our prophet to say to God, and quote, we worship thee as we are your servants, while wealth engendered in Pharaoh and Nimrud the vanity which made them claim Godhead, and they became godless. So seek knowledge, peace and health. And then he said that finally, when someone shares something of value with you and you benefit from it, you have a moral obligation to share it with others. And that's exactly what we are doing through Ahlebait TV, for which we are grateful to the owners of Ahlebait TV. From this platform and using IMI Health Hour, we have been disseminating knowledge on different aspects and different subjects for the last 3-4 years. This is a part of series on the subject of Encyclopedia of Islamic Medical Ethics that we are developing with the contribution of more than 110 authors from different countries. Today I've invited a very young, bright, excellent scholar who's just won a scholarship from the Fulbright Scholarship and is traveling to Harvard soon. His name is Aamir Abbas, and he's going to talk about research ethics. Aamir, could I welcome you, please? Assalamu alaikum.
Yes.
So what we'll do is, if you can start with your slides and tell me to change, I'll change them from here and then continue to discuss afterwards. So I've got your first title, which is Research Ethics, and it shows that you are an expert in epidemiology and biostats, and you are currently in Pakistan but soon traveling to USA, inshallah.
Yes, thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity to talk on this topic of research ethics. This is a lengthy topic, and we will be talking on this topic in parts. And this is the first part of the series of talks we'll be conducting on research ethics. Can we go to the next slide, please? So, the contents of our presentation. We'll be talking about the history of research ethics. We'll be talking about the principles of research ethics, and we'll continue with the guidelines for research ethics. So starting about the definition of ethics, to go to the next slide, please. Ethics or moral philosophy is a branch of philosophy that involves systematizing, defending, and the process of wrong. In simple words, ethics is a discipline which tells us that what is right and what is wrong in our real world. And if you go to the next slide, please. This slide shows us the definition of research ethics. And research ethics concerns the responsibility of researchers to be honest and respectful to all individuals who are affected by their research studies or the report of study results. So in other words, research ethics guide us at how we can conduct our research work and search for the truth as well, and at the same time be ethical and do things in the right way, as we are dealing with human subjects or other living beings. Next slide, please. Research ethics involves the requirement on daily work, the protection of dignity of subjects, and the publication of the information in the research. So, because we're dealing with the real world subject, so we need to ensure the dignity, and we need to publish the information in such a way that no harm is done. Next slide, please. The background of research ethics is that there was a lot of human experimentation even before 18th century. However, ethical attitudes of researchers drawn in the interest of society after 1940s because of human exploitation in several cases. Next slide, please. Professional codes and laws were introduced since then in order to prevent scientific abuses of human lives. The Nazi experiments led to the Nuremberg Code of 1947, which was the leading code for all the subsequent codes made to protect human rights in research. So this was the first time, and the Nuremberg Code was the first time when somebody drew attention when there were massive human experimentations and human beings were used for experimental purposes. The Nuremberg Code focuses, if you go to the next slide, please. Focuses on voluntary informed consent, liberty of withdrawal from research, protection from physical and mental harm, or suffering and death of the human subjects. Next slide, please. Then, if you go to it was in 1964 with the Declaration of Helsinki, that need for non-therapeutic research was initiated. It was updated many times after that. And that was followed by, if we go to the next slide, please. It was followed by a Belmont report, which was issued in 1970 and published in 1979, which focuses on ethical principles of human subject research. And the core principles which were elaborated in this report included respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. Can we go to the next slide, please? So, from here, we talked about the principle of research ethics. The first and foremost principle of research ethics is autonomy. Human beings, this is a fundamental human right to be autonomous and to be respected. Therefore, participants are required to be able to actually think, decide, and act. There is no people are able to make independent decisions, while those with diminished autonomy are entitled to protection. Those who can think, those who are mentally stable and those who are adults, they are given all the information related to the research project, and they are allowed to make a decision on their whether to participate or not to participate in a particular research project. But those who are not autonomous, like children, or those who have mental disability, there should be guidelines for them as well. So this is the first principle of research ethics, which is autonomy, or respect for the human subject. Next slide, please. So the principle of autonomy respects core practices including informed consent, protection of vulnerable participants, rights to privacy, anonymity, and confidentiality. Whenever we are making a research proposal, these all aspects are needed to be fundamental parts of the research proposal. Researchers are required to make an elaborate informed consent covering different aspects of ethics, ensuring one aspect being autonomy, we need to show how the vulnerable participants, for example, children, underserved communities, or the anonymity and the confidentiality of the subjects is ensured. All these aspects are needed to be elaborated and clarified in the research proposal. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. The next principle of research ethics is beneficence. That is to do some good. Obviously, we do research to find the truth, and we do it to do the good to the society. Nothing that benefits may be direct or indirect, may including contribution to knowledge. But obviously, I mean, the research project should be justified as the whole of the society. Next slide, please. Perhaps more important, it is non-benefit. Nothing that risk of harm is often balanced against other principles, especially beneficence. That at best, the risk of harm in research can be minimally guaranteed. It means that the research work should be done in such a way that we should ensure that no harm is. But when we talk about the real world, the parts of the research project, but that risk cannot be finished. We want the researchers would want to give up the risk, and also it is also the part of the research proposal to show that if there is some anticipated risk, how that risk will be managed if encountered. Next slide, please. The subsequent principle of research ethics is related to justice, fairness, and equity. And obviously, this is, and being a Shia Muslim, this is the word justice is very much close to our heart as well. This usually requires an assessment of who benefits for the research and who bears the burden or takes the risk. That at best, the risk of harm in research can be minimized, not guaranteed. Next slide, please. With participants or other researchers or other source material. Fidelity therefore incorporates other principles such as integrity, trustworthiness, and honesty. Next slide, please. The next principle is related to academic freedom. That is the research freely of interference, including from funders, commission companies, government, or institutions. So this is a very important principle, particularly in the era of the pharmaceutical industries, when so much of the financial are involved in the research involved in different medicines. The academic freedom is very much important. Next slide, please. So here we will be talking about the guidelines of conducting different research projects. And whenever we conduct these research projects, we need to keep these principles in mind, and there are some guidelines which have been specified while executing different research projects. The first guideline is norms and values of research. Researchers are obliged to comply with the recognized norms of research ethics. Different academic approaches and theoretical positions may also allow for different but nonetheless reasonable interpretations of the same material. Next slide, please. Consequently, it is important to reflect on and account for how one's own values and attitude affect the choice of topic, data sources, and interpretations. Integrity in documentation, consistency in argumentation, impartiality in assessment, and openness are the aspects which are needed to be ensured while conducting different research projects. Next slide, please. The subsequent guidelines relates to the freedom of research work. Both researchers and research institutes are responsible for preserving the freedom and independence of research, especially when a topic is controversial, and when strategic or commercial considerations impose pressure and constraints on research. Example of this being, as I already mentioned, something related to the pharmaceutical industry. If a pharmaceutical industry is sponsoring medicine, we need to ensure that the research is done in an environment that we are able to find out the true reality whether the drug is working or not. In the same way, if there are some strategic or commercial considerations related to an institute, then again, requisite freedom is needed to ensure that we are able to find the truth. Next slide, please. So, we also need to ensure a responsibility of research. Responsible research requires freedom from control and constraint. But first in research requires the exercise of responsibility by both researchers and research institutes. So, next slide, please. What do we mean by responsibility? There is a great demand placed on the justification of the researchers for their choice of questions, methods, analytical perspective, and quality of the documentation, because overall the correct choices on these domains will determine the research projects and that will ensure that next slide, please. So, research institute must guarantee that research is good and responsible by preventing misconduct and promoting the guidelines for research ethics. The institution must facilitate the development and maintenance of good scientific practice. The institution must ensure that they manage the guiding and advisory function of research ethics properly, so that the distribution of roles and responsibilities is clear. Here it's very important that different ethical bodies, particular ethical review committee, have the IRBs have the responsibility of carrying out capacity building among the researchers to ensure the smooth functioning of different research institutions, so that there is a balance between the fact that the research is also not stopped, but the research is, and at the same time the research is conducted in an ethical way. So the function of ethical review committee and institutional review board is not to stop the research project, but to make it, but rather to facilitate and make the research work more ethical, so that we can find out the true value of different research questions. Next slide, please. The subsequent guideline relates to human dignity. Researchers must base their work on a fundamental respect for human dignity. And researchers must protect personal integrity, preserve individual freedom and self-determination, respect and family life, and safeguard against harm and unreasonable strain. So, the basic principle, which I always teach to my students as well, that you should just think that whenever you recruit a research subject, that is a human being, and you should treat that person in the same way as your blood relative, as you want to be treated yourself, or you will want a blood relative like your mother or brother or father should be treated. So if you just keep that very simple principle in mind, you will be able to treat every human being in a dignified format and in an ethical way as well. Next slide, please. So the subsequent, the next principle, the next guidelines for research ethics pertain to the privacy. Research must respect the participant's autonomy, integrity, freedom, and right of co-determination. Research must be conducted in accordance with the basic consideration of data protection, such as personal integrity, privacy, and responsible use and storage of personal data. Now, this point is important in the and when a lot of research is conducted through different platforms like internet. You need to ensure the privacy of the individuals. Next slide, please. When self-respect or other values of importance to individual are at stake, these are the areas where privacy becomes a lot of concern. These are some of the few examples. For example, when self-respect or other values are important in the United States, when individuals have better influence on decision to participate, particularly when we are talking about individuals having some mental incapacity, for example, when individuals have impaired or absent capacity to protect their own needs and interests, so in those conditions, it becomes more important to ensure the privacy of the patient. Next slide, please. But research is a balanced. Research ethics is balanced. It's not on one extreme. On one hand, when we are talking about the privacy of the patient, but there are some conditions that the research also has the duty to inform. Researchers must provide participants with adequate information about the field of research, the purpose of the research project, who has funded the project, who will receive access to the information, the intended use of the results, and the consequences of participation in research projects. Next slide, please. Consent and obligation to notify. When a research project deals with personal data, researchers are obliged to inform the participants or subject of research and to obtain their informed consent. Their consent must be freely given, informed, and in an explicit form, which means that there should not be for simple information. Then there should not be that if they do not take part in the research project, their clinical care will be withdrawn. In the same way, all the procedures which are the patient is through which the patient or the participant are going to undergo, the participant are needed to be informed about it in detail, and the information should be explicit rather than it should be clear in a language that is understood by the research participant. Next slide, please. So the next principle pertains to the next guideline pertains to confidentiality. It's kind of overlap a bit with the privacy, but there are some other areas which are important. Which we deal with. Generally, researchers must process the data required about personal matters confidential. So data must be de-identified, while publication and dissemination of the research material must be anonymized. And this is a very important. There are particular procedures which we call as the pseudonymization, in which you can add pseudonyms to the participants, and then if needed, you can rename the participants as well, so that confidentiality of the patient is retained. In certain situations, researchers must nonetheless balance confidentiality and the obligation to notify. For example, there are particular conditions in which the researcher might want to inform the relevant authorities. For example, if there is some threat to the life of a particular person in case of dealing with some mental health patient, or if there is a threat of spread of communicable disease and there is threat of an outbreak of an epidemic, then research guidelines also, there are exceptions to this guideline related to confidentiality. Next slide, please. This pertains to the limited reuse of the data which is acquired. Now, research ethics say that whenever you take the consent for a particular research project, you should use that data for that research project, and the identifiable personal data collected for a specific research purpose cannot automatically be used for other research. And if one plans to do so, then a second consent related to the second research project or the subsequent research project is needed to be acquired once again. Next slide, please. Responsibility for avoiding harm. Data related to identifiable individuals must be stored responsibly. Such data must not be stored any longer than what is necessary to achieve the objective for which it was collected. I mean, for example, if the data is stored as the guidelines, now the timeline may vary depending on different research projects, but if the data is no longer needed, it needs to be destroyed. It is no longer needed to be saved so that no harm to be done to the patients. Next slide, please. As we talk about the research, then we are also guided to have respect for the third parties. Researchers should consider and anticipate effect on the third parties that are not directly included in the research. Interviews, studies, and observations often result in the researcher gaining access to information about far more individuals than those who are focus of the study. Next slide, please. Researchers should be aware of potential unintended consequences of the research, for example, that other members of the group feel unreasonably exposed. The for train or third parties to place the position of research and pursuit. So this point is also needed to be considered that if those the information related to the other individuals which are not directly involved in the research, because we are not being able to take consent from those individuals, so that information is needed to be dealt up with in an ethical fashion. Next slide, please. Another important aspect of research ethics guidelines related to protection of children. Children and adolescents who take part in research are particularly entitled to protection. Children are developing individuals and they have different needs and abilities at various phases. Next, please. We know about children to be able to adapt both the method and the direction of the research to the ages of the participants. In general, minors who have turned 15 to 18 year age can consent to researchers collecting and using their personal data. I've used the range 15 to 18 because the age of being minor varies from country to country. In some countries it's 15 years, in others it's 16, and in some of the countries it's 18 years. But all of them, the research guidelines agree that there's a cutoff of age before which the individual should be considered a minor and they should be treated differently. Next slide, please. So, if a child is under 15 to 18 years, which means that depending on the country in which that person is, researcher must usually obtain consent which is from their parents or guardian. Next slide, please. Respect for privacy and family life. Researchers must respect individuals' privacy and family life. Participants are entitled to check whether confidential information about them is made available to others. So, this information, if information related to somebody might create some problems for the researchers. Therefore, that information is needed to be handled very carefully. Next slide, please. Respect for the values and motives of others. Researchers must not ascribe irrational or unworthy motives to participants without providing convincing documentation and justification. Researchers must show respect for values and views of research participants, not least when they differ from those generally accepted by the society at large. Next slide, please. Here we go. It is important to care when conducting research of disease, of the prescription of disease and their researchers should choose their words with care by presenting the research project. Next slide, please. During the process of the research project, it's important to define roles and responsibilities. Researchers are responsible for explaining to the participants the limitations, expectations, and requirements associated with their role as research participants. Next slide. From here we will end our discussion for this episode, and we will start our discussion. But there are a number of, there are at least 20 or 25 more guidelines which we will continue on the
Thank you, Aamir. I think we need to discuss a few topics and remain online, although maybe the line is not that good, for which I certainly apologize to the viewers in the audience, because you are sitting far away and technical difficulties cannot be overcome. However, now I have a few points to make in this discussion. I think what you've highlighted absolutely wonderfully is that research is the basis of promotion of knowledge. It goes without saying, because you cannot advance. Science cannot advance without research. But in order to conduct research, you have to follow certain guidelines, and you've given a whole list of guidelines that one should follow. What is important to remember, and this is where I seek your opinion, is the importance of autonomy. Autonomy, I think, is the fundamental principle. What do you say?
I couldn't hear it clearly because the voice was distinct.
So what I said was that you've highlighted the importance of autonomy. Autonomy means what you're saying is that person who is involved or engaged in research, a subject, has full rights, and the person who is conducting research has responsibilities towards certain acts. Can you highlight a few more things in this? Say, for example, if you're conducting research on a particular subject, how do you deal, how do you engage the person, keeping the concept or the principle of autonomy in view? Well, I think the line is difficult and kind of interrupted. What I'll do is I'll explain to the audience on your behalf that the importance of autonomy is that it's twofold. Autonomy means that the subject who's engaged in research has the rights to know everything about the good and bad points. Will he benefit with the research? Will the community and the society will benefit with the research? Will he be given any rewards for research, or will be rewarded in terms of any other benefits? Now, these are delicate subjects. The responsibility also goes pari passu with the rights. Responsibility is that of the researcher, the scientist carrying out research, to fully inform the person of all the consequences, not only just the procedure but also the merits and demerits, what could be the possible risk engaged in it, and so forth. So there has to be a balance between rights and obligations. That is the subject of autonomy. Autonomy means khud mukhtari. And if a person is capable, mentally capable and age-wise capable to give the consent, as Aamir pointed out, it is a, but if it's a minor or somebody who is mentally incompetent, then certain rules and regulations, like Aamir has pointed out, that in case of children under the age of 15, here at 16 or maybe 16, maybe a cut-off point, then it has to be conducted with the consent of the wali, the guardian, and that guardian must be fully aware of the consequences. Now, what I would like to emphasize here is that a lot of research, particularly in the developing countries, is carried out where autonomy and the concept of informed consent is not fully and clearly applied, and I'll tell you the reason. Because most of the informed consent forms, which we used to use in theatres, for example, or research, were in English language. And that by itself is a handicap, because a lot of people in our countries don't speak language. So I think it is mandatory upon the researcher that the words given in that form should be clearly defined, described, elaborated, and discussed with the person in the local vernacular language, could be Urdu, Sindhi, Gujarati, Punjabi, Pashto, what have you, with clear intention of being honest to himself and honest to his conscience and to God, that no bias is carried out. Would you agree with me that?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, because this is a very serious problem, particularly, as you rightly mentioned, particularly in the developing world. There are a number of, having worked in the developing world for the last 5 years, there are a number of reasons for this problem which is identified. The first thing is the requisite knowledge and awareness among the researchers is lacking. Most of the researchers consider ethical processes information. I've been always comfortable ethical review committees because I understand language, how to communicate, how to address their concern, how to write the research proposal in such a way that all the ethical aspects are mentioned and addressed in the write-up of the research proposal, so that you, as you rightly mentioned, that if you are engaging some vulnerable population like minors or mentally ill individuals, specifying how problems in the developing world, and then those problems can be addressed by educating the researchers and facilitating and making the role of ethical review committees and institutional review boards facilitating the projects.
Yes, your sound is breaking again. So let me just add a little more on your behalf, that when we talk of human subjects who volunteer, and we see it in the UK also, that there are advertisements which are there in the newspapers inviting people for engaging into research, a certain remuneration can be paid in lieu of their services. Now that remuneration should not be massive, it should be compatible with the pain, the suffering, the travel costs, and probably stay for a day or two or whatever is needed minimum. And that has been controversial in the past, but now generally it is accepted that subjects who are engaged in research, invited to participate in research, can be paid a certain amount. It's been a practice for a long time in many countries. I'm not sure if the same applies to Pakistan and maybe India. Maybe Aamir can tell us?
For their travel. Now that they should, it's unreasonable to pay it from their pocket, but at the same time, so it means that the researchers should pay them for all their time and their travel. But at the same time, the money should not be so much that the pocket is the prime motivator for the research work. So whenever we are executing a research project and we are incentivizing the individuals to come into the research, then to go for a child people at the same time not so much payment with them, that the money comes from with the part in the research.
Right. So moving on, there's one more topic that you've covered very nicely, and that is data protection. Recently, I attended a course, a day course. We have to do it regularly because of GMC commands that every year you have to do a certain amount of mandatory courses to keep your license to practice or to maintain your rights to practice. And this was a wonderful course which I did. It lasted about 2-3 hours online course, where the major emphasis was on data protection, because recently in the last 2-3 years there have been a lot of cases of data, a breach of data because of some silly things people have done. So there is a strict guidance that we must follow if you're working with the NHS, and I'm sure the same applies to Pakistan, but I think we need to emphasize that the data must be protected, and you rightly pointed out that the identification of the person engaged in research must be anonymized. That person should be anonymized, and the photos and all those formula have to be kept. And the more important thing that I learned was that many times you get these mails which have been described as phishing mails, and phishing is not F-I but P-H-I-S-H-I-N-G, phishing mails, which are suspicious mails, where they want to get the data from you. The doctor or a person who's doing research or engaged in clinical practice must be aware, and that email must be deleted without opening. That's one. The second thing is the use of USB. We are not careful with the USBs. USB is a computer in its own right. So if it's your private USB, it must be encrypted if you're using for data, for any patient's data. Otherwise, do not use the USB on a computer which is alien to you. Likewise, what I also learned was that when you are referring to a particular research or clinical trial, or even clinical subjects, the important thing is that even if you take a screenshot for maybe a feedback, remove the names. The name should not be, name, address and personal data should not be visible or should be transferable to any other person who is authorized. Finally, I would also like to say that working in the NHS, we have to use the NHS email, because the other emails, although they may be safe, but they are not considered to be safe for data particularly. And I'm sure the same rules can be applied in Pakistan, India and the developing countries, the Middle East, where there's a lot of problems of data breach. Perhaps Aamir can dilate upon this subject.
Yes, if I may comment on the data protection aspect, this is a very, very important area, particularly in the current era of the data science, when the data is coming from all aspects, like whenever we are using our mobile phones, when we are using our social networks, Twitter, Facebook, etc., Instagram, WhatsApp. We are using a lot of data, we are generating a lot of data, and this data is used by many individuals, but for research work as well, without our, we at times say yes to different applications, and we do not read the agreement statement, but they take a consent from us, but we do not read is being used and is insecure. You are right in saying, particularly when we have the example of USB, all of our data which is in the cloud is vulnerable, and there has to be hospitals and health institutions managing the health and management information system should ensure that and data they should have secure platforms to ensure the confidentiality and privacy of the patient of the data which is in the cloud.
Yes, I will go to the extent also of saying that do not take your personal computer for work things. I mean, you can use for work, a lot of people do that, they work from homes and things like bankers and all, but it is unsafe. I think it's best to have encrypted and personalized an absolutely marvelous kind of password which is multiple digited, X number of digits plus figures and so forth, so nobody can break that code. The point that I'm making is that data protection is one of the most essential components of modern day medicine, because what is happening is that the data is in the air, in the clouds. It's not the old fashioned files that, you know, the files you could maintain and keep them safely in lock and key. Now the data is in iCloud and so forth, and there are people who are always looking for certain opportunities, the bad people, the evil person who can exploit, and therefore the data can be lost. Finally, and we'll come to the last 3 to 4 minutes, what you also mentioned, something very interesting, is that the data that you use, research, or should I say the research subjects, the data you've used for one particular research must be deleted. You cannot use for the same data or same subjects for another research, even though it could be a corollary to the research. What do you say to that?
Yeah, this is a very, I mean, some of the institutions take some data consent from the patients without the patient even knowing this. Practically, this is not ethical. For example, I would not name the institutions, but we have seen it in some prominent institutions that in the form that, that the patient's information can be used for research work as well. And the patient is kind of coerced to actually sign the form without reading, and nobody explains it to them, and nobody reads it for them, and the patient has just decided. And when you ask them why you use the data for the research work, they say that we have taken an umbrella consent from all of our patients. This is wrong on the basis of this guideline. Whenever you include a patient in your research work, you need to give them the information of the specific research topic in which they are enrolled. The second need to take a second consent of them. So this is only
Aamir, you have covered a lot of subjects, and I think what we'll do is I'll summarize on your behalf, if you permit me, that research ethics, or should I say ethics for research, is a very important subject, and you have covered the fundamental rules. You talked about the Helsinki Declaration and further developments following the Helsinki Declaration, which in fact the fallout of the Nuremberg Code of 1947. After 64, there have been many developments, and every few years people who are experts in the fields, they sit and modify. Belmont report you mentioned very categorically, that's important. What lags here, and this is what we would like to cover, is the subject of animal experimentation, because that is a subject we need to discuss, and maybe in the next talk when you have in a week, maybe next week or the week following, that because a lot of research involves the animals. So what rights do the animals have, and what is the obligation of the research scholars in carrying out research on animal subjects? Because a few years ago, I remember there was a big problem here in the UK. The animals who were being used for experimentation in different labs, they were targeted by people for various reasons. So I'll not go into the details, it becomes a political issue, but the point I'm making is that that is the subject we need to cover in the next discussion. So could I say thank you to you, Aamir. You're a wonderful research scholar, and hopefully you'll soon be in America. We'll have a better line, better connection, and more clear discussion in due course of time. In the meantime, would you like to say a word or two towards the final things, and we can close the session after that?
Yes, I think animal research is a separate and elaborate topic, and we will discuss that. And that has a number of aspects we will talk about in detail as part of the next talk, inshallah.
So thank you, Aamir. You've been very kind, most gracious, and we'll meet again hopefully next week, inshallah. And this is a wonderful talk that you gave on research ethics, and it will be available on the YouTube in due course of time and uploaded on Medics International Virtual University. Thank you, viewers. Khuda Hafiz, until we meet again.